Hello, RDs and RDs to be. Welcome to the RD Exam Ready podcast. My name is Zach Caseberg, and I'm very excited you're here. If you're here today, that means that you want to learn more about preparing for the CDR exam and look for smart, effective ways to do that. And I promise you're in the right place. I always find a great spot to start with students is making sure that you understand the CDR exam itself, the breakdown of it, how it's scored, and everything in between. Even if it's your first time or your 15th time taking the RD exam, it's good to go through this process to understand the CDR outline. Do you remember the breakdowns of each area of the exam? I remember studying and feeling a bit freaked out by the breakdown, but after years of walking other students through it, I can give you some of the necessary info that you need to go about your studying. Let's start with domain by domain. Domain 1 is going to be Principles of Dietetics. That's going to be 21% of the exam. Domain 2 is going to be 45% of the exam, which is Nutrition Care for Individuals in Groups. Now, what I usually point out to students right off the bat is if I combine those domain 1 and domain 2 percentages, 21 plus 45, then I'm going to get 66% of the exam, or two-thirds, coming from those first two domains. And I like to point that out because obviously that means that if we want to have a great shot at passing the exam, we should really try to reach the highest score we can in that combined domain 1 and 2. For our last two domains, domain 3 and 4 will be 21% and 13% respectively. And together, that's going to be 34% of the exam, just over a third. So it's like we're breaking it up as two-thirds and a third. January 1st, 2022 is when the exam guidelines were last updated as of right now, 2025. And in 2026, they may update slightly. But what we usually predict is that the domains will stay a little bit heavier focused on domain 1 and 2. Because previously it's kind of gone that way as well, where they've kind of brought down domain 3 and 4 a little bit for the breakdown and added more to domain 1 and 2. We'll see what those breakdowns look like on the updated guidelines. To dig in more into the CDR outline, we want to go through each domain and talk about the foundation. The first domain of domain 1 is really laying your scientific foundation. Think of it as the why behind everything you recommend as a dietitian. We kick things off with things like food science, water, vegetables, fruit, dairy, even the functional foods. You'll need to know how ingredients behave and interact with food, as well as their chemical and physical properties. Then there's going to be nutrition composition. What's really in your food? You'll be studying label claims, nutrients, even phytochemicals here. Then we get into areas such as principles of normal nutrition, how nutrients function in our body, and what our needs are going to be through the life cycle. That means everything from breastfeeding to aging adults. Add in the basics of anatomy, physiology, microbiology, and biochemistry, and how all these systems fit together. Don't forget, there's also some of those things such as social determinants of health, such as income, culture, and education that shape how people eat. Domain 2, the biggest slice of the exam pie. This is where all that theory comes to practice. We start with screening and assessment, everything from dietary intake to biochemical markers and physical exams. You'll assess not just individuals here, but entire populations and communities. Next, we go on to diagnosis, the D of ADIME. You'll use standardized language here, forming those PES statements to identify problems, causes, and then linking those signs and symptoms to come into play. Then we start talking about planning and intervention. This is where your medical nutrition therapy is coming into play as well. So intervention will be all that MNT knowledge that you use. Finally, monitoring and evaluation combined here. You'll track the progress, adjust plans, and decide whether to conclude or continue care for the patient, and maybe a practice question. Domain 3. You won't just counsel clients, you may be the manager of a department one day, and this domain is really getting into what that comprises. You'll start by going through things like management functions, planning, staffing, directing, controlling, and organizing, going through all of the process there. Understanding leadership and emotional intelligence will all fall into those five functions. Human resources is next, things like employment laws, hiring, training, keeping a diverse and motivated workforce. Financial management is always a beast for a lot of us, but this is where you'll use things such as profit loss, budgeting skills, financial analysis, all falling into those areas. A few other things that'll be included in Domain 3 will be things like fiscal management, marketing, public relations, so you know how to promote your products and how to go about it. Lastly, but not leastly, we have Domain 4. We're going to start Domain 4 with menu development, creating nutritionally balanced and adequate meals for the customers that we serve, considering things like cost and regulations and really what the customer wants, too. Procurement and production is more about how you purchase, get the food, produce the food, and then give it to the customer. Sanitation and safety is obviously huge, where we learn about different types of sanitation, keeping things sanitary, as well as those foodborne illnesses that we know fall all under that umbrella. And then there's equipment and facility planning, sustainability efforts, emergency preparedness. This is closing out the fourth domain as the last piece of information that you need. Whew, so, how do you feel about that CDR exam outline? It feels like a lot when you talk through it, but remember, a lot of this information is overlapping and blending together. Some of the things I learn in human anatomy and physiology is going to serve me greatly when I get to my MNT in Domain 2. So, fear not, you can absolutely overcome this. I want to talk too about how to build a study schedule. This is the big thing that students come to me for. They'll message me and reach out and say, Zach, how do I build up a schedule? So I want to kind of give you a step by step guide of building a schedule, building a calendar, and mapping out your next 2 to 3 months of studying. So let's talk about that. Pick your study window. Like I said, most students do pretty well in a 2 to 3 month study period. It's enough time to absorb the material without dragging it out and really having burnout during the study process. Now, open up that calendar. The next part is going to be key. Block off all the dates that you know that you cannot study. This is what we start with. That's going to include vacations, surgeries, appointments, mental health days, family obligations, and yes, even just regular days off. You need those rest days. Even if you're studying full time or even part time, make sure you're at least giving yourself one full day off of studying if you can. Next, let's set up what maybe a standard week is going to look like for you. I usually like to just give students a Monday through Friday presentation here, but know that this could vary if you work on Saturdays or Sundays or have a different schedule like that. Studying full time, part time, doesn't matter. Here's just a little sample of how I would go about approaching. What I always look for from students is variety on the studying. What I always worried about was them getting too burnt out on one concept. We don't want to spend a whole week just on one single topic because there's a lot on the exam to cover. So let's kind of give some diversity here. You'll take your resources that you have and you'll start off on Monday, let's say, with Domain 1, Principles of Dietetics. You're going to start out this study process really taking at least one day a week for each of these domains. So Monday, you do Domain 1. Tuesday, you take time reviewing Domain 2. Wednesday, you're doing Domain 3. And Thursday, you're doing Domain 4, but you're also going to add in food service calculations. I put these two together because Domain 4 is 13% of the exam, and after about a month or halfway through your studying, you're going to be through that material, I anticipate. So now you'll have more time to maybe add in extra food service calculations, especially if you're someone who struggles with that. Finally, with Friday, our last study day of the week, if we were full time, for instance, we would do just practice questions and overall review. So during the week, we're really intaking the information. We're really working on intaking and learning it. And then on Fridays, you're going to use a little bit more of that application piece there. As I said, let's keep this up for the first half of your study period. That's about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on your timeline. This next stage is going to be all about kind of not so much that intake, but you're going to be focused more about how do we use the material here, right? So, halfway through your studying, I want to see a little shift in what you're doing and what your schedule looks like. We're going to focus more on application about halfway through, answering questions, identifying weak areas, and reinforcing that information that you've just learned in that first phase. Now, our schedule might look a little bit like this. Monday, we're going to review domains 1 and 2 together. Tuesday, you're going to do practice questions on domain 1 and 2. Practice questions, exercises, case studies. You're going to be applying your knowledge, drawing it out, mapping it out, teaching others, and applying that info, not just learning it. Then on Wednesday, you can focus on domains 3 and 4 together right there, about that third that you're seeing. Thursday, you can then do your practice questions on domain 3 and 4. So you're getting a great blend here of your keeping yourself exposed to the material regularly, and you're adding application into all of your study sessions. Friday, you can take things like a full length practice set. You can do overall review, or you could even do a practice exam if as you get closer to this point. Friday is more just saying, hey, let's get this overall review, do all practice questions from all domains, and really make sure we're applying things here. You see that pattern? We're alternating between very focused review and then targeted application. This structure lets you reinforce content while training your brain to retrieve that information under pressure, just like on the actual exam. Once we're about 2 weeks out, it's just time to refine and fine tune. We're getting close now. This is all about refinement. You've built this knowledge, you've practiced it in questions. Now it's just time to sharpen your sword a bit. In this final stretch, you should be focusing on things like taking full length practice exams, continuing daily practice questions, still giving yourself a day off, but doing intentional practice question sets, and then maybe taking once to twice a week where you're doing a broad topic review, or you're going to focus on something that you really struggle with. Treat those practice exams very seriously. When I did them, I did several, and I would replicate the timing, the setting of the exam. I would have no phone with me. I would have a dinky little calculator and a scratch paper. And that was all that I went into for my practice exams to really teach myself how to sit there for that period and have the stamina to do that many questions in a row. Once we're in that final 48 hours, getting ready to take the test, here's the tip that most people skip, and it's going to make all the difference to you. Do not study the day before your exam. I know, it's really hard to hear. Research shows that you're going to perform better if your brain is well rested and not overloaded. Trust the work that you've put in up to this point. Use this final day to relax, hydrate, sleep, and do something for yourself. Your brain needs to be clear, not crammed for your exam day. There it is, RDs and RDs to be, a brief introduction of the CDR outline and a guide to help you with getting started on your study plan. Remember, a good study plan is intentional and has a good balance between keeping you moving forward without overworking your mind in the process. This thing is a long journey, and it isn't just about getting through the material. It's about preparing in a way that leaves you confident, calm, and ready to walk into that testing center knowing that you've put in the work to this point. And if you liked this episode and you liked the study plan guide, share it with your study buddy, leave a review, and subscribe to get some more tips on studying. Until next time, happy studying to you, RD to be.